Hello and welcome to Seamless Transition from VMware to AWS, Modernization Strategies for a Future-Ready IT Infrastructure, featuring AWS and ClearScale. As for the agenda of the day, we'll have a few different presenters. Angela McCord from AWS will start us off with AWS for VMware migrations. From there, we'll go to Sukriti Gupta from AWS to cover AWS Application Modernization Overview. And then Kevin Epstein, my colleague from ClearScale, will take us through a quick look at the ClearScale cloud migration methodology, followed by a couple of case studies. All right. First, before we get started, just a little bit about ClearScale, the host for this webinar today. We're a born in the cloud company that was founded in 2011. We're all in on AWS, meaning we only work with AWS and no other cloud platforms. We've completed more than 1,000 cloud projects, including over 400 migrations to AWS. Among those are many VMware to AWS migrations. We're an AWS Premier Tier Services partner and have earned 12 AWS competencies. With that, I will pass it over to you, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela. I'm a Specialist Solutions Architect at AWS. And I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. Speaking today from AWS is myself. We have Sukriti Gupta and Hemant AVS as well. For today's session, we're going to be talking about trends that we've been seeing in the past few months and how we've been able to help customers to be able to migrate from their VMware infrastructure to AWS successfully. As I'm sure a lot of you on this call know, the VMware hypervisor holds more than 70% of the global server virtualization market, and it's been a very popular hypervisor choice for many organizations in the past years. However, since the Broadcom VMware acquisition that happened last year, we've been seeing a steady increase in the amount of customers that have been coming to us. And these customers have been wanting to know more what their options are when it comes to migrating off of this platform and what a migration could look like for their organization. Now, when I say VMware, I'm including both the on-prem vSphere as well as the VMware Cloud on AWS solution, or VMC, but it's also known as VMCA. So this is going to include all of those. And today we're going to be talking about how we can help with the process of migrating, and not just migrating, but modernizing workloads and what that process could look like. And we're also going to be talking about how to get started with the migration and what is available to you in the way of training as well as funding options. Every customer is different, and so is what is driving their need for change. But whatever the reason is for making the decision to no longer use VMware, that underlying reason, what we've been seeing, is falling into one or both of these categories. Now, you may be driven by events such as the need to either consolidate a data center or completely evacuate a data center. Or you could be facing end-of-life dates for hardware and software. You could also be driven by the need to modernize your mission-critical VMware workloads. Migrating, optimizing, and modernizing those workloads to the cloud has proven to be an effective approach for organizations to address these needs. And with the changing dynamics and the shifting sentiment that we've been seeing of late, customers are coming to us and they're looking not just for alternatives to VMware, but for strategies and also guidance. No matter what your motivating factor is, we are committed to helping you. Migrating your workloads to AWS, it gives you the benefit of the AWS infrastructure, and that infrastructure spans 108 availability zones within 34 geographic regions. There's also plans for to add another 18 more availability zones to that as well. And that's not to mention the over 200 services that AWS provides. And And depending on your individual situation and business needs, you could have time to evaluate your options and formulate a plan for your business, and that's great. That's the situation that we all want to be in, right? But if you're finding yourself with an immediate need to migrate, that's not a problem either. We can assist with a quick lift and shift to EC2. And then from there, take a look and guide you through modernizing those workloads. And modernizing is something that we're going to touch on and talk about in depth a little later on. But keep in mind, whether you have 3 months, 6 months, a year, or even longer, we can help you with a solution that fits within that time frame and meets your needs. Whatever your goals might be with this changing landscape, we're aware that there are concerns. We've seen quite a few different concerns, but the most popular ones that we've been hearing from customers when they're considering moving into the cloud and off of VMware are these. The first one and the most common is centered around skill set. A lot of customers have employees that have been working with VMware for 10, 15, 20 years or their entire career. And they just feel that their skill set doesn't translate well to a cloud solution. But there's plenty of training available, and that training can help bridge that gap very well. Another major concern, not major, but the biggest concern that we've been seeing is companies just haven't done a cloud migration before. And we have a solution for that as well, which we're going to get into here in just a moment. And the third is centered around costs that are potentially associated with a cloud migration. And Kevin's going to talk about this a little more in depth later, but there are funding options available specifically for VMware migration paths. So we can support each of these concerns and help make it an easier transition for you to AWS. Now, breaking apart these 3 reasons or 3 ways that we can help you: training and support, technology and services, funding and incentives. So let's take a look at each of these real quick. First, we're going to talk about training and support. In terms of training, AWS has a lot of different methods to help develop skills. Everything from digital training to instructor-led courses and even certifications. We have those available to help bridge gaps for VMware admins. Digital training is that self-paced, the sit down and do at your own pace. You can pause, you can get up, come back to later. Instructor-led, just like it says, in a classroom, immersive and hands-on. And there's also AWS certification and education programs. And those really help you continue to upskill, and you can get those industry recognized credentials. Technology and services. AWS has a service called Application Migration Service, or it's MGN for short. Some of you on the call may have heard of or used Cloud Endure. So MGN is formerly known as Cloud Endure. And what it is a highly automated lift and shift solution. It allows companies to lift a large number of virtual or physical servers and shift them into the cloud. And it does that by replicating source servers into your AWS account. And then when you're ready, it will automatically convert and launch your server on AWS. Then once your applications are running in AWS, you can then use the over 200 AWS services and capabilities, and you can quickly and easily re-platform those applications. And it really makes the lift and shift a fast route to modernization. Digging in a little bit more to MGN, MGN is designed for large-scale migrations. It's got a simple setup process, and it enables you to quickly begin replicating your source environment out in AWS. You can migrate applications from any source infrastructure that runs supported operating systems. And MGN supports the most common Windows and Linux operating systems, as well as other hypervisors. And after the initial sync of your server is complete, the continuous replication, it will keep your servers up to date on AWS. It uses a block level replication, and that's not just to expedite the migration process, but it shortens the cutover window. So you're really seeing a non-disruptive continuous replication that's happening. MGN replicates the machine state. It replicates operating system configuration. It replicates applications and files. And this really means that your workloads are kept up to date. And then when you're ready to perform the cutover, there's no playing catch up. You don't have to wait for the most recent data to arrive. And for that replication, MGN uses a secure mechanism for the data from the source to the target. So the target out in AWS, it's secure. It's secure both in transit and it's secure at rest. And it also works with VPN connection and with AWS Direct Connect as well. And on top of all that, MGN is managed through the AWS Management Console. So what that means is you're able to integrate with the other AWS services like CloudTrail and CloudWatch, just to name a few. But like I said, it's perfect for large scale migrations. And I want to highlight one customer that had a great success with the MGN product. It's 3M. So 3M is a global manufacturer, and they had a situation where their data centers were aging. And not just that, but they were finding it hard to obtain new hardware when they needed to increase their capacity really fast. They started looking for a cloud hosting solution, and they selected AWS as their preferred cloud provider. And they used tools such as MGN to migrate over 2,000 servers, and they did it in 24 months. And they were also able to optimize their compute costs as well as improve the resiliency as a result of migrating. And funding and incentives. Now, I touched on this earlier, but there are VMware migration specific offers that can be leveraged to help with cloud migration. A good place to start is with this no cost assessment, an OLA, optimization and licensing assessment. And what that does is it provides you with recommendations to reduce your costs. And when I say reduce costs, we're reducing costs not just on compute, but on storage and licensing. And it also gives you a strategy to optimize your capacity. And we're going to get into this later on as well. And I mentioned 3M, but these are a few more companies that have seen success and benefits from migrating. Companies like Salesforce, Nestle, Samsung, and there's a few others on this slide, but the one that I want to highlight here is Maiden. So Maiden is a technology healthcare company, and they wanted to migrate to a new cloud provider, but they really need to do so without disrupting service for both their patients and their care providers. They're in the UK, and they provide technology for mental health care services as part of the National Health Service. So they migrated using MGN. They did it with minimal downtime. They were able to migrate 300 servers to AWS in only 6 weeks. And now Maiden is expanding to new regions, and they have already used AWS to build infrastructure for new services in Canada, and they did that in only 10 days. A quote from the product owner of Maiden for the systems team: "We wouldn't have gotten this done as quickly and with the low amount of downtime that we had if we hadn't had the support of AWS MAP and worked with the partner." So to sum it all up, how do you get started? request an AWS assessment, or that's the OLA that I mentioned. It will assess your overall VMware estate, leverage a partner to help you, decide on approach and strategy together. So do you want to take a full or partial migration approach, and how fast does it need to be done? And then once that's been decided, take advantage of the incentive and training programs that are available from AWS. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about modernization. If your approach includes modernization, you can start by migrating your VMware workloads first and then work on modernizing. And to take a closer look and talk to you about that modernization, security.
Thank you so very much, Angela, for setting up the stage about the modernization. And team, thank you for joining us this morning or this afternoon based on wherever you are. So Angela talked about how the migration to the cloud can help you and what are different resources to help you with your migration journey. Now, usually what we see is like when you start migration, it might be a good idea to think about modernization as well. This is a Deloitte survey done sometime in 2019, but a lot of it is still resonates with a lot of our customers. The CIO feels that 80% of developer time is spent on operation and maintenance, and only 20% of the time is actually spent on the business logic or innovation. And that's where thinking about the modernization as you're thinking about the migration could help you to focus more on the business logic and kind of offload all this heavy, undifferentiated maintenance work to AWS or the cloud. So there is a lot of conversation about modern application, but in reality, what does constitute a modern application? And this is a long CNCF definition, so I won't read it, but to summarize, it's basically a set of architecture and software best practices that help you to add features quickly, more frequently, reliably, and consistently, right? So you can make the changes based on the new set of customer demand. You can scale them up when your demand scales, and you can do everything very effectively. On the bottom, we have a list of services, and we'll be touching base some of these services as a later part of the slides, such as Lambdas and the Fargate. These are our serverless compute options. Then you can look over the EKS and ECS. These are our container deployment options. EventBridge, which is an event router. And finally, the step function, which helps you to orchestrate your entire workflow. So this one is going to be a bit of introductory, but you can always reach out to your account team for us to do a deeper dive on any of the services and architecture. So what are some common challenges when our customers think about the modernization, right? And the biggest one we see is like what we call as a big bang approach or boil the ocean approach, where you look over a historic monolith code base and you decide, okay, I'm done with it. I'm going to modernize everything all at once. And usually it's not the best of the recommendation because there is so much of legacy built over the time. And it could take a very long time. It could result in downtime. So in the next slide, I will show some recommended patterns. The next one is fail to rationalize and prioritize the applications. We usually recommend to pick one pieces at a time and then go through the modernization journey. Other thing is the whole modernization journey is a combination of people, process, and technology. So technology is one aspect of it, but the other two things to think about is people and the process, and making sure all the key stakeholders from the DevOps team to platform team to engineering teams, they are all aligned. They all know what the North Star of success looks like. And basically, you enable the team to have the right set of skill set, as Angela was mentioning, through the different learning paths. So the team is ready to pick up this modernization journey. We do have a couple of modernization workshops to help you go through it and think about it. And again, happy to talk about it as part of the conversation. So we talked about that the Big Bang approach is not recommended. So what are some of the good practices to thinking about modernization? Option is like you launch a new feature fast. So instead of changing your existing code, if you're planning to add a functionality, why not implement it as a microservice? And that helps you to launch these new capabilities on a faster way. And you also get to experiment with this new technology stack. The second one is as popularly known as a strangler fig pattern, which basically says you keep identifying the applications which are ready for modernization and you keep upgrading those apps to modern set of app and microservices. And just like a strangler fig the vine, over the time, basically you wrap these vines all around the host, and basically you have a new event-driven modern architecture. And the last thing is when you are thinking about the modernization journey, start with the right set of applications, have the right set of multi-account strategy, look over the options such as AWS governance, uh, control tower, and that can help you to set up the right set of organizational structure or the guardrails as you kind of think about the modernization journey. So we talked about how to do the modernization one application at a time, finding the right set of applications. But if you think about the modernization and the compute, it has been a journey, right? All of us started with the physical machines where the whole procurement time and getting them onboarded, getting them scaling, and loading your application, we were talking about months. Then the availability of virtual machines on the cloud was a big step forward, which cut down this kind of acquisition time from months to in minutes and allowed you to trade capex for opex. The next journey in this evolution was containers, right? And containers allow you to package all the dependencies in one image file, and then you can deploy it anywhere. I would say that one of the latest frontier in this compute evolution is our serverless technologies such as AWS Lambda or the Fargate, which allows you to continuously scale your application. You only pay for the value and there is no maintenance, right? Because we are the ones who are taking care of all the patching, upgrading, everything for you behind the scene. So serverless looks great. Let's summarize what are the key benefits of serverless, right? So unlike to traditional VM where you are always paying for the VM to keep alive, in serverless configuration, you only pay for the value. If there is no incoming calls, you don't pay anything. It's high performance and gives you roughly seamless scalability as you demand a spice, it can scale more. You get to market faster, deliver new set of features, and since these are micro VMs, they have built-in kernel level security options, so they are secure and isolated by design. The table on the right kind of reminds you when you are in traditional VM-based environment, how many of the steps you have to think about, starting from configuring an instance, updating the OS, installing the runtime, uh, configuring automatic scaling and load balancing, always securing the instances, and finally monitoring and maintaining the apps. If you look at the last column in serverless, the only two things you really focus on is first, you are still the one who will be building and deploying the apps, and you are still the ones monitoring and maintaining the apps for P90 or P95 latencies and things of that. But everything else is kind of offloaded from you so you can focus on the business logic. Now, when we talk about the serverless, a lot of times the things that get the limelight is the AWS Lambda, which is our function as a service. But just to call it out, we offer AWS Fargate. We have also a lot of managed services such as Amazon S3, our Aurora serverless MySQL compatible databases. And these are all serverless in the sense that you never think about the underlying infrastructure. As your database grows, the underlying infrastructure scales and everything is taken care of you. And on the bottom, there are a lot of integration services which are also all serverless in nature because once you configure them, they can scale for you. So continuing this conversation, this one is just how you should think about a an event-driven architecture, right? A lot of times when you are starting your application, and if you think about your own monolithic application, it all starts small, right? You are creating a, let's say, very simple e-commerce platform. You have a simple order service, and when customer places an order, it gets started to an invoice fulfillment and forecasting service, right? Not that complicated. But if you look over this kind of implementation, which is kind of a synchronous implementation, there is a direct coupling between producer and consumer at every point, and that creates a multiple points of failure. So, for example, if your forecasting service is down, it could bring your entire code down, though the forecasting doesn't necessarily should impact your ordering service. And that's kind of the pitfall of having a monolithic synchronous kind of a implementation. How you can improve this scalability is like you introduce the decoupling agents throughout the implementation. So, for example, when the order is received, you put an event router over there. So, event router can acknowledge the order, and it can route that event to all the different services. Or you can use a simple notification service, SNS, which is more like a pub/sub model. You place or publish that order has taken place. Now, any service which needs it, it can pick that order. Another recommendation is right before every service, you might want to use some kind of event store or SQS, simple queue services. And that basically makes your system scalable if you have a certain burst workload or if you have a Black Friday event. Because now, even if your infrastructure is taking some time to scale, those events or those orders doesn't get lost, or customer doesn't get to see a failure error. Your event buffer can store it, and when your uh, underlying infrastructure is scales, you can start processing those orders or the events. And this is one of our colleagues, and he has this very interesting code that if you are trying to create a cloud native or large scale distributed system and don't have messaging or event component, at this point of time, that's probably a bug in the architecture, right? And that's what we usually see when you don't have these event bridges in stores. When you all of a sudden get a very spiky workload, infrastructure starts to crumble. So it's a good practice. So we touch base on event-driven architecture. And the last couple of slides, I just want to touch base on the containers. So as we talked about containers, containers allow you to pack all the dependencies as an image file. And the key benefit of it is you might recall you might be developing your code on your local laptop, you take it to staging QA production, and then finally you deploy it on-prem, cloud, or even a hybrid configuration. Throughout every stage, you might have a different OS versions, libraries, dependencies, and that creates a point of failure. What containers do is they pack all the dependencies as an image file, which runs on a kernel. So no matter wherever you deploy that container, you are always rest assured how the container or how your application code is going to perform. So what are some of the benefits of the container? First of all, they are lightweight and smaller than VMs because in VM, every virtual machine has its own host operating system. In this case, multiple containers can share the same kernel or OS kernel. So they are lighter, faster to start, gives you much better bin packing. And lastly, as the slide says, you build it once and you can rest assured as long as you can have the right container runtime, you can run it anywhere. I won't talk about this entire slide, but the whole idea for the slide is just to show you a possible implementation where everything or majority of the services are serverless, such as AWS Fargate, Amazon Aurora serverless databases, and DynamoDB. So again, you create this kind of application, everything scales seamlessly for you, right? And that's kind of the value of thinking about the serverless implementation. Now, continuing the conversation, there are two very popular platforms within the Amazon in terms of container orchestration. So by orchestration, I mean it's like managing the entire life cycle of container. and scaling up the number of pods, scaling down the number of pods, everything is taken care of this orchestration platform. So Amazon ECS along with the Fargate, this is our opinionated version of container orchestration platform. If you want to just get started with the containers, it's a great platform to get started because there is no version upgrade. All those things are managed for you by AWS. However, if you have already started using Kubernetes, you like the open source framework and tools, and using open source options such as OPA, you can use EKS, which is our Elastic Kubernetes services. And this is a fully managed service. We take care of everything on the control plane. You only focus on the data plane. And again, you get all the benefits of Kubernetes because it's a fully upstream compliant Kubernetes deployment option. So this is kind of the last slide to summarize. We talked about a lot of options as we have gone through the presentation, starting from EC2, container orchestration, serverless deployment options such as AWS Fargate and AWS Lambda. If you look at what AWS manages versus what customer manages, you can see in EC2, you are still the one who needs to manage the application code, all the integrations, scaling, network configuration, provisioning, patching, security, and everything. But when you look over the AWS Lambda on the top, again, as I mentioned before, the only thing you have to think about the application code, everything else is taken care for you. So with that, these are some of the good links if you want to get started even with your event-driven architecture or the containers. And the PDF versions are available in the handout. So you can get these PDF, look over these links, and basically get started on your journey. So with that, I will now pass it to Kevin, and Kevin can talk about how ClearScale can help you with this journey. Kevin?
Great, thank you. So here at ClearScale, we talk about a customer's migration as the 5 E's of process. And so you already heard this in some slightly different, words from the AWS team. And this is a overall process. It takes some time. This is probably for a larger customer. And if you have maybe 10 or so odd servers, you're probably not going to dive deeply into each one of these pillars. But if you have a data center that needs evacuation, then probably you're going to do some or all of these things. Starting with evaluate, if you are coming from a stance where this is a new idea, you haven't really thought through all the ins and outs of a migration, we'll start there. This is where we'll help you build a business case, help you understand what the return on investment might be, what the migration plan would look like. Are you going to do that lift and shift migration? Or are you going to do some amount of app modernization, or whatever the case may be? From there, we'll go into what we call the embark phase. This is where we will start to help you build a landing zone within AWS. We may build a couple of POCs just to validate some of our assumptions and operational working knowledge about how things will work for you in AWS. So, for example, if you have never used a CI/CD platform before, we would bring that to the table and we would start to show you what that might look like. If you do use a CI/CD platform, we would look at what the differences would look like. And all of this happens sort of in that embark phase where we're validating all of our designs and our plans and the future phases for the rest of the migration. Once we're through the embark phase, we'll get to execute. This is sort of the meat and potatoes of the migration. There's a lot of work that happens here, whether it be lift and shift for workloads that we're going to use MGN as a tool and just migrate workloads as they stand into AWS, or if we're going to start to do some modernized work at this point. So some of your workloads will not be moved as is. We will actually, do some amount of modernization, and then the migration is actually a deployment of the modernized version of the application. Enhance is where we talk about actually some even more of that, is where if you're taking a workload that is on a VM today, and maybe a VMware instance in the data center, and we want to do some very light touch modernization, we may containerize that application. That may be an interesting first step, and there's a couple of reasons why that may or may not make sense to you. AWS has some tools that can help this as well. They have tools like app to container, which can help us package apps into containers and make that a little bit easier as well. And you may even have some containerized apps already running on your VMware environments that more or less are good to go, minus a couple of configuration changes and optimizations for AWS. And in Enhance, we may do things like also convert services to microservices. In that case, maybe we're going to start using things like AWS Lambda to again leverage more of what the platform has to offer. But it could also be something as simple as you deployed Elastic Cache in your data center, and you would like to use Elastic in AWS, but you would prefer not to have to manage it quite so much. In which case, we would move you to OpenSearch or something like that. If you have Kafka in the data center today, we might move you to MSK. And again, the benefits there are that these are fully managed services by AWS. These are though still it's still Kafka, but it's just managed by AWS for you in the case of MSK, taking that overhead off your plate. And then once you get to Empower, this is kind of where you get back to your operational day-to-day running, care, and feeding of your environment. You may do this on your own. You may do this with ClearScale. It really just depends on your level of comfort with AWS. If you've done the migration with ClearScale, you are going to grow in comfort through every phase that we work through with you. So your team is going to learn and be a major part of this whole migration as well. As you can kind of see, the core team changes as we move through the different phases. So you will have a solutions architect and a principal architect who will probably be with you through the duration of your project. We'll have specialists for various different parts of it. For example, maybe we'll bring in a container specialist if you have a Kubernetes workload, or if you want to package an application up and deploy it on Kubernetes, for example. And then we have our app dev team who will help you with modernization, whether it's a rewrite of the app or just packaging into containers. Angela also mentioned briefly, and I'll touch on this a little bit more, that all through the various phases, AWS has funding programs that can help with funding the project. As you might imagine, there is definitely a certain amount of commitment that's required to be able to execute these projects. And AWS does what they can to try and help make that a little bit more palatable. So even from the very early phases where we're in evaluate and we do what's called a map assess, we can get some funding there, all the way through the POC phase, the embark phase, and the execute phase, which are AWS will call those the mobilize and migrate. We have funding programs that can be used to, again, just to contribute to the overall project. There are also special programs, particularly if you're coming from VMware. There are definitely some additional funding mechanisms that we can leverage, again, just to make this a little bit more palatable. Last thing I'll mention, we did talk about MGN as a tool that can help you move workloads in a lift and shift migration. There are other tools out there as well. In some cases, they will do very similar things, but they're distinctly different in at least one way. So, for example, a partner we use heavily is River Meadow. And what they do is they can do a lift and shift, but they can also do an OS upgrade in place. So if you think about lift and shift, typically we do a bit-for-bit copy of the VM and we relaunch it on AWS. With River Meadow, we are doing essentially the same thing, but we're also sliding out the old OS and sliding in a new OS at the same time. So you get the benefits of lift and shift. You don't have to change much, but you also get the benefits of modernizing your underlying OS. So, for example, if you have Server 2008, 64-bit edition or later, and you want to get to, let's say, Server, one of the more modern versions of Windows Server, we can do that with River Meadow. We also have a group of other partners that help us out. So Datadog is a visibility tool. It helps you understand what's happening. It complements CloudWatch, which AWS gives us and is as part of the platform. I would say they're complementary. They do similar things, but they do them slightly different. And Datadog will also give visibility into other workloads that CloudWatch necessarily cannot see. So again, I think they're somewhat complementary. And we also partner with Relutech, who, if you're doing a mass data center migration and you're going to be left with a whole bunch of hardware at the end of this, Relutech will actually go and buy that hardware off of you again, just contributing to the overall return on investment for the migration that you're busy planning. Wanted to talk about a case study with an integrated marketing agency that we've worked with. They specifically had a lot of uncertainty around VMware. Obviously, they'd heard from the Broadcom account team, and they weren't really sure that they liked the proposal that was being made to them in terms of renewals. So they wanted to migrate to AWS. They already had some workloads in AWS. And they went through the process with us. So you heard the OLA. You heard Angela mention that a little bit earlier. That's the optimization and licensing assessment. We did that for both the VMware and the Microsoft workloads. And so for Microsoft, we do take into account the Windows Server licensing, but we're actually much more interested in the SQL Server licensing, because that's really where we're going to make the difference for you. We did a migration discovery, just understanding what was out there, what was going to move, what was going to get retired, because there actually was a good amount of their estate that could be just sunset and retired. Therefore, don't spend money on migrating those workloads. Mobilization, that was really just them taking what they already do, and they were pretty heavily leveraging Jenkins and various other automation tools. So just taking that and seeing what that would look like on their AWS platform as we move them forward. And then they had a bunch of what they call environments that needed to move. And environments are not just dev, QA, and prod. Environments are deployments for various customers in their case as well. The result for them was that they were able to move. They were able to vacate their data centers before those renewals came up, and they obviously avoided very, very large renewals with VMware. So just a sort of a high-level profile of them. Overall, a total of 19 workloads equated to about 680 virtual machines across all of the typical development environments that you might expect to find. Things that I thought were interesting for them was that they did commit to moving SQL Server to Postgres. That's a really complementary migration. The code quite often looks quite similar. The structures look very similar. So it's generally a good move from SQL to Postgres. They had a bunch of Elastic, which needed to continue to run, but they chose to use AWS's OpenSearch service, and thereby meaning that they really didn't have to think about the day-to-day management of the clusters once they were deployed. From their homegrown Redis, they were going to use Elasticache, and then from Kafka, they were going to go to MSK. So they were really focused on leveraging heavily as possible the managed services that AWS has to offer. And then they're currently in a stabilization phase where the migration is done, and they are now just stabilizing the environment, and we're a partner with them through that phase as well, just to make sure that once their team are taking care of this, that they're actually well equipped to be able to do that. Another quick one that I wanted to talk about, this customer, they are in the medical space. They had a migration as well from VMware. They're actually pretty technically competent, but they were not familiar with the AWS platform. So they asked ClearScale to help them out. And really the focus from a ClearScale perspective was help us get into AWS, but help keep us, people like to say HIPAA compliant. Really, a better way to state that is HIPAA eligible. The idea here was we helped them architect the solution that would ultimately be what they would deploy. We helped them actually do the migration, and then we helped make sure that post-migration, that everything was buttoned up and as it should be, so that they would be HIPAA eligible. The result for that, obviously, is that they were able to turn down their data center and are now 100% in AWS as well. We do have an offer, so if you're considering making a migration to AWS, and if you're on VMware, we do actually have some offers to do an assessment. These are relatively low-touch engagements where it's not super disruptive to your team, but it gives you the information that your leadership will need to be able to make a really strong financial case for why they would want to migrate to AWS. So the environment review, just understanding what you have and what you're coming from today, what the cloud targets would be. Is it inside of AWS? Are you going to go to EC2? Are you going to go to managed services? Are you going to modernize your application workloads and use things like ECS or EKS? And also just to give you a cost-benefit analysis, right? None of this makes any sense if you can't prove to the company that that financially you're going to be better off on the backside of a migration. Why go through all the effort? We'll do also a licensing assessment. That's the OLA. This just helps you understand what you would be on the hook for if you kept things as they are, and also if we move to AWS, how that licensing commitment would change for you. And then obviously an overall exit roadmap. And this could be anywhere from just a handful of months, 3-4 months in a very small environment, to multi-year if you're a very, very large enterprise with, let's say, hundreds of thousands of workloads. So use the QR code if you want to learn more. Also, we have the pop-up with the special offer. So feel free to take a look at that. And I do think we actually have a couple of questions as well that come through as we've been chatting. So Kevin, I'm going to just start at the top and then see how we get along. The first question I see here is, what key architectural considerations should be made when transitioning legacy VMware workloads? Honestly, I think there's a whole gamut of things to consider. Are you going to move the workload as is? Are we going to just lift and shift that VM, essentially just another virtual machine? Are we going to try and modernize it? How critical is that workload? If we just move the single VM and it were to fail, today in the data center, what does that look like? Tomorrow on AWS, what does that look like? Obviously, single points of failure are generally frowned upon. We try not to have those because those obviously can be business impacting. But I think really the things you want to be considering is, what does the migration roadmap look like? Is it going to be lift and shift, or are you going to modernize? If you're going to modernize, are you going to containerize, or are you going to completely rewrite and go to serverless, let's say Lambda or something like that? I think those are some of the key things you're going to be wanting to think about. The next question we see here, how do we handle the migration in such a way as to minimize downtime? The reality is that there probably will be very small amounts of downtime in most cases, not all. But what you can do is you can do data replication. So from on-premise, you can do data replication into the cloud. We can have the workload ready. We can turn it on, and we can swing DNS across to the new workload once it's all been tested and validated. And then what you would tend to do is leave both workloads running so that you don't, if you don't want to generate an error, you would leave both workloads running. You would have replication continuing behind the scenes. And as DNS updates for everyone, more and more folks will be hitting the new endpoint, and you'll be in great shape. If you want a very low to no downtime type of approach. If you can stomach a little bit of downtime, it's probably a lot easier with a lot less headache. You turn off the old endpoint, you turn on the new endpoint, string the DNS, and you do that during a posted maintenance window, and that might be the best way to go. Although, like I say, these days, more and more we try to do these with minimal to no impact. So you may have some sort of background replication continuing while you move traffic from the old endpoints to the new endpoints. There's a couple questions on this next one. I think we've talked about scalable architecture. This is really sort of a nod to, you can't just keep throwing bigger and bigger machines at a problem, because at a certain point you get to the biggest machine, and then how do you scale? So this really is just understanding how you break down your applications into orchestratable parts that can be deployed in smaller and smaller bits. So we've all heard of service-oriented architectures. We've all heard of microservices architectures. In the world of AWS, we've all become familiar with the notion of loose coupling. So whether that's an SQ or some sort of load balancing technology, we want to break up our workloads as much as possible, make them resilient by having multiple versions of each piece of the application, so that we can load balance and we can be fault resistant and resilient. I think those are all key things. And then just obviously making sure that we break down monolithic applications into serviceable components. I think that really is the key to a scalable architecture. Best practices, we touched on some of these already, talking about just making your application resilient, using decoupling technologies like SQS or SNS or any kind of load balancing technology that you might want to use there. And actually, this is a really good point and call out, is that there is a well-architected framework. AWS gives us a lot of insight and advice into how to think about how we want to architect our workloads and how to assess them and make sure that they're actually well architected. And if we do that, if we execute well on that, then we'll have good uptime, we'll have good resilience to faults, and we'll be able to scale as well. The next question that I see is really just a question about specific AWS services and tools to address security. I'll start with almost every single service and tool within AWS has security considerations baked in. You really do have to take a security at every sort of juncture and point inside of your architecture. You can't just think. There was a time where you used to be in the data center, you put a firewall at the exit, and then that was security. It doesn't work like that anymore. We really have to think about security at every single layer throughout the entire application. And so whether it's a security group for an EC2 instance, whether it's a web application firewall in front of a load balancer, there's various mechanisms that we can use and should deploy to help us enhance security at every juncture. The other thing that I'll talk about, I mentioned on the part of the question, was about compliance. So compliance really is about visibility, just being able to see into the workload, to understand how it's operating, to understand when and how it changes, because changes happen. We deploy new updates all the time. So just having that visibility, and to that extent, there's things like CloudTrail that will help us understand how the AWS environment is changing. We also have CloudWatch, which helps us understand how our workloads are changing. CloudWatch is made up of quite a few different modules now. They also have CloudWatch logs. We also have Amazon Inspector, which can be deployed onto the VM or into an instance or a container, so we can actually see at an OS level what's happening as well. So it really has to be a holistic approach. You can't just rely on the security tool at the border, the firewall, and then say that you're safe. There was a question also about how we manage integration of containerization of serverless. If you think back to our 5Es, this is going to come down to enhance. So in some cases, it'll be very light touch enhancements, and we just package up an application that's predisposed to being containerized already, and it's very simple to move it to a container and deploy it. In other cases, it may actually require a full rewrite, and we have a full app dev team who can help you with that as well. And whether you're rewriting it and deploying it as a container, or if you're going to use something like AWS Lambda, we can help you with that as well. Couple more questions that I see that we have. What are the options for support? Well, AWS has a couple of options for you. There is free and premium support from AWS specifically, so you can register with AWS for support. You can also get enterprise support, in which case you'll get a technical account manager, and you'll have a team at AWS that are very closely aligned with you, working all the way, as your workloads are running inside of AWS. Also, from a ClearScale perspective, our customers, as we work with them, obviously during and through the project, we are supporting them. We also do offer managed services for long-term support of their environments as well. The last question that I see here is just sort of a post-migration question, and this is around about optimization. It's a really great question. There's a couple things that you're going to be looking to do. Obviously, when you migrate, there's going to be some amount of stability period where you just want to let it sort of settle in, get to understand how your workloads are operating inside of AWS, and then start to look for the optimization options. It may be as simple as we over-provisioned an EC2 instance, or our RDS instance is larger than necessary.